The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I could bring myself to open it. Cream-colored paper, elegant script, the kind of formal invitation that screamed money and careful planning. My name was written in flowing calligraphy, Ms. Diana Martinez. Not Captain Martinez, not General Martinez, just Ms. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I stared at it while my coffee grew cold, watching the morning light shift across my small apartment in downtown San Antonio. Through the thin walls, I could hear Mrs. Chen next door arguing with her television again, the familiar sound of someone who'd given up on being heard by actual people. The apartment was sparse by choice, not necessity. A single photograph sat on the windowsill. Me in dress blues at my promotion ceremony last year, shaking hands with the Secretary of Defense. But that photo faced the wall. Had been facing the wall for 8 months now, ever since the last time I'd tried to call home. When I finally tore open the envelope, the invitation was exactly what I expected. Thick cardstock, gold embossing. My sister Victoria's name printed in letters twice the size of her fiancé's. Victoria Marie Martinez and Lieutenant Marcus Thompson request your presence. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson. The name hit me like a slap. I set the invitation down carefully, walked to my laptop and pulled up the military personnel database. A few keystrokes later, his service record filled my screen. 82nd Airborne Division, 2 tours in Afghanistan, Bronze Star with V device, currently stationed at Fort Bragg. The same Fort Bragg where I'd given a classified briefing to his entire command structure just 6 months ago. The same base where Lieutenant Thompson had stood at attention in the back row while I'd outlined new counterinsurgency protocols that would save lives in his next deployment. He'd been one of 40 officers in that room. I'd been the 2-star general at the podium, discussing strategies that were above his clearance level. We'd never spoken directly, but I remembered his face. Young, serious, the kind of soldier who took notes during briefings that other lieutenants treated like mandatory nap time. And now he was marrying my sister. The sister who'd hung up on me 8 months ago when I'd tried to tell her about my promotion. The sister who'd told our mother I was playing soldier and embarrassing the family name. The sister who'd made it clear that Diana the Disappointed was welcome at family gatherings, but General Martinez was not. I walked to my closet and pushed aside the civilian clothes until I found what I was looking for. My dress blue uniform hung there like an accusation, ribbons and medals catching the fluorescent light. The combat action badge gleamed silver. The Purple Heart seemed to pulse with old pain. At the top, 2 silver stars marked the rank that had cost me everything I'd thought mattered. Dear. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Misha, you're coming to Victoria's wedding, right? It would mean so much to her. I almost laughed. Victoria hadn't spoken to me in over a year, not since the Christmas dinner where she'd announced to the entire extended family that I was still pretending to be important in the army, while she was building a real career in marketing. When I'd quietly mentioned my recent deployment to Syria, she'd rolled her eyes and said, "Oh please, you probably just filed paperwork in some air-conditioned office." Our cousin Miguel had tried to change the subject, but Victoria wasn't finished. It's embarrassing, honestly, a 34-year-old woman playing dress-up. When are you going to grow up and get a real job? I'd left without saying goodbye. Drove 6 hours back to base in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The next morning, I'd led a briefing for NATO commanders on Middle Eastern coalition strategies. The irony wasn't lost on me. Gui a wak rock rai, wak rock rock wak rai. Now Victoria was marrying one of my soldiers. A man who'd sat in my briefings, who'd implemented strategies I'd developed, who'd followed orders that had ultimately traced back to my desk. The same desk where I'd made decisions that had saved lives, including possibly his own. I picked up the invitation again. The RSVP date was tomorrow. The wedding was in 2 weeks, back home in El Paso, at the country club where Victoria had always dreamed of having her perfect day. The same country club where my parents had celebrated their anniversary every year until Dad passed away 3 years ago. Kuti, Sapti Mis. Dad, he would have been proud. A career Air Force man himself, he'd understood what the uniform meant, what the sacrifices cost. But he died 2 months before my promotion to brigadier general, before he could see his eldest daughter pin on her first star, before he could know that the quiet, bookish girl who'd always preferred strategy games to shopping trips had become one of the youngest female generals in the army. Mom had been at the promotion ceremony, but she'd spent the entire time worried about what the neighbors would think, about whether the attention would somehow reflect poorly on Victoria's upcoming engagement announcement. She'd barely looked at me during the ceremony, too busy texting Victoria updates about Diana's military thing. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. I walked to my window and looked out at the city below. San Antonio sprawled in all directions, a mix of old Spanish architecture and modern glass towers. Military City, USA, they called it, a place where uniforms were respected, where service meant something. But respect was a funny thing. You could earn it from strangers in a heartbeat, and lose it from family over a lifetime. I thought about Lieutenant Thompson again. In 2 weeks, he'd marry my sister in front of 300 guests, most of whom knew me as Victoria's older sister, who'd never quite figured things out. The disappointment, the failure who'd joined the army because she couldn't hack it in the real world. They'd celebrate love and new beginnings while I sat at whatever table they'd relegated me to, probably near the kitchen or by the emergency exit, far enough from the head table that I wouldn't embarrass anyone in the wedding photos. The invitation listed Victoria as a marketing director at a local advertising firm. What it didn't mention was that she'd been fired from 3 previous marketing jobs for what one supervisor had diplomatically called interpersonal challenges. What it didn't mention was that she'd borrowed money from our parents 6 times in the past 2 years to cover rent. What it didn't mention was that her current job was part-time, barely above minimum wage, and that she'd been desperately looking for a military husband to provide the stability she couldn't create for herself. But Lieutenant Thompson didn't know any of that. He knew Victoria the way she presented herself. Confident, successful, from a good family. He probably thought he was marrying up, joining a family of accomplished civilians who'd welcome a military man with open arms. No, I wondered what she'd told him about me. Probably that I was the black sheep, the sister who couldn't handle real responsibility, so I'd run off to play soldier. Maybe that I was unstable, or difficult, or just too intense for normal family relationships. She certainly hadn't told him that her sister was the general who'd signed off on his last fitness report. That her sister had personally approved the commendation that had fast-tracked his promotion to lieutenant. That her sister had been in the room when his name had come up for the Bronze Star recommendation. Small world, the military. Smaller than Victoria could possibly imagine. I made my decision the way I'd been trained to make all decisions, quickly, based on available intelligence, with full awareness of potential consequences. I walked to my computer, pulled up the airline website, and booked a flight to El Paso. 1 carry-on bag, return ticket open-ended. As I closed the laptop, my reflection caught in the black screen. For just a moment, I saw both versions of myself layered together. Diana the disappointment, and General Martinez the leader. 2 women who'd somehow ended up in the same body, wearing the same face, carrying the same scars. In 2 weeks, Lieutenant Thompson would learn that they were the same person. I just wondered which one Victoria would claim to know. The flight from San Antonio to El Paso was only an hour, but it felt like traveling back in time. As the plane descended over the desert landscape, I could see the familiar sprawl of my hometown stretching toward the Mexican border. The Franklin Mountains cutting sharp silhouettes against the evening sky. I'd changed into civilian clothes for the trip. Dark jeans, a simple blouse, nothing that would draw attention. The last thing I needed was someone recognizing my face from military publications or news coverage. For the next few days, I needed to be Diana Martinez, not General Martinez. The rental car waiting at the airport was a basic sedan, unremarkable in every way. I'd specifically avoided anything that might suggest success or authority. As I drove through the familiar streets toward my childhood neighborhood, memories pressed against the windows like desert heat. There was Roosevelt High School, where Victoria had been homecoming queen and I'd been editor of the school newspaper. There was Memo's Tacos, where Dad used to take us every Sunday after church, where he'd tell stories about his Air Force days while Victoria rolled her eyes and complained about the grease stains on her cheerleading uniform. I pulled into the parking lot of a small diner on the east side of town, one I'd never been to before. Inside, the decor was stuck in 1987. Red vinyl booths, fluorescent lighting, and a menu board that advertised world-famous green chili cheeseburgers. Perfect. Anonymous. The waitress who approached my booth looked tired, her name tag reading Carmen. She was probably around my age, but life had worn different paths across her face. "What can I get you, honey?" "Coffee, please. And maybe some answers if you've got time." She raised an eyebrow but poured the coffee. "Depends on the questions." I pulled out my phone and showed her the wedding invitation. "My sister's getting married at the Cielo Vista Country Club this weekend. Victoria Martinez. You know her?" Carmen's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "Might have heard the name. Why?" "A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel." Now, back to where we left off. "I haven't been home in a while. Trying to figure out what I'm walking into." She slid into the booth across from me, glancing around to make sure her manager wasn't watching. "Your sister, she comes in here sometimes, usually with different guys, always talking loud about how important she is." Carmen paused, studying my face. "You don't look much like her." "Different fathers," I lied smoothly. It was easier than explaining that Victoria and I had grown up in the same house but lived in completely different worlds. "Well, she's been talking about this wedding for months. Big military man, she says. Gonna take care of her the way she deserves." Carmen's tone suggested she had opinions about what Victoria deserved. "She brought him in once, actually. Nice kid. Too good for her, if you ask me." My pulse quickened. "You met him? Lieutenant Thompson?" "Yeah, real polite. Called me ma'am, tipped well, didn't let her talk down to me like she usually does." Carmen refilled my coffee without being asked. "He asked a lot of questions about the neighborhood, about your family. Like he was trying to understand where he was marrying into." "What kind of questions?" "About your parents, your dad's military service, whether there were other family members he should know about." Carmen gave me a knowing look. "Funny thing is, your sister kept changing the subject every time he brought up family, like she didn't want him digging too deep." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Did he mention anything about his work? About other officers he'd served with?" "Now that you mention it, yeah. He was talking about some briefing he'd been to, something about new training protocols. Said it was the most impressive presentation he'd ever seen, given by some female general." Your sister shut that conversation down real quick, started talking about cake flavors. The pieces clicked into place with military precision. Marcus had been talking about my briefing, the one where I'd outlined new combat readiness standards for his division. He'd been impressed enough to remember it months later, to bring it up in casual conversation, and Victoria had deliberately steered him away from the topic. She knew. Somehow, she knew exactly who I was in Marcus's world, and she was actively hiding it. Carmen was watching my face. "You okay, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that." I pulled out a 20 and left it on the table. "Thanks for the coffee. And the information." "Whatever family drama you're walking into," Carmen called as I reached the door, "just remember, that boy seems decent. Don't let your sister's poison spoil something good." I drove aimlessly through El Paso for an hour, processing what I'd learned. Victoria wasn't just dismissing my career anymore. She was actively sabotaging any chance that Marcus might learn about it. She was building their relationship on a foundation of deliberate ignorance. My phone rang as I sat at a red light downtown. The caller ID made me hesitate. Colonel Sarah Chen, my deputy commander and closest friend in the service. "Sarah." "Diana, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day. Where are you?" "Taking some personal leave. Why?" "Because Lieutenant Thompson's commanding officer called looking for you. Apparently Thompson's been asking questions about the briefing you gave last month. Wants to know who he can thank for the new protocols that probably saved his squad's ass in their last training exercise." I closed my eyes. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing yet. But Diana, this kid's about to get married. His CO wants to arrange some kind of commendation ceremony, maybe invite the general who developed those protocols to the reception. He's trying to surprise his lieutenant with recognition." The irony was suffocating. Marcus's commanding officer wanted to honor me at my own sister's wedding, not knowing that the bride had spent years telling everyone that the guest of honor was a family failure. "Sarah, I need you to do me a favor. Tell them the general is unavailable for the next week, personal matter. Diana, what's going on? You never turn down recognition ceremonies. I pulled into the parking lot of a gas station, needing to focus on the conversation. It's complicated. I'll explain later. This is about your family, isn't it? The wedding? Sarah knew the basics. That my family didn't understand my career, that there had been tension. But she didn't know the depth of it, the years of systematic dismissal and humiliation. He's marrying my sister Sarah. Lieutenant Thompson is marrying Victoria. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, softly. Jesus Christ, Diana. Does he know? No. And Victoria's made sure it stays that way. You have to tell him. Do I? Maybe some things are better left buried. Bullshit. Sarah's voice turned sharp, the tone she used when cutting through bureaucratic nonsense. That lieutenant has been telling everyone who'll listen about how that briefing changed his perspective on leadership. He's been implementing your strategies with his own soldiers. You think he doesn't deserve to know who his mentor is? After I hung up, I sat in the car watching El Paso come alive for the evening. Families walking to dinner. Couples holding hands. Normal people living normal lives without the weight of secrets pressing down on their shoulders. I thought about the last time I'd been home for a family event, Dad's funeral 3 years ago. I'd worn my dress blues, partly out of respect and partly because I'd known it would be one of the few times Victoria couldn't criticize my appearance. But even then, she'd found ways to diminish me. At least you look professional, she'd whispered during the service. Too bad it's all for show. After the burial, at the reception in our parents' backyard, Victoria had made a toast to Dad's memory. She'd talked about his Air Force service, his dedication to family, his pride in his daughter's accomplishments. When she'd mentioned me, it was as Diana, who's still finding her way, but we know Dad would want her to keep trying. Still finding her way. At 31, with 2 bronze stars and a Purple Heart on my chest. I'd left that night without saying goodbye to anyone. Drove straight back to base and threw myself into work, into the deployment that had earned me my first star and cost me any remaining connection to my family. Now I was back, carrying secrets that could change everything or destroy what little relationship we had left. Marcus Thompson was about to marry into a family that didn't know their black sheep outranked him by several pay grades and had personally shaped his military career. The desert sun was setting as I finally drove toward my mother's house, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me why I'd loved this place once upon a time. Before I'd learned that some distances couldn't be measured in miles, only in the space between who you are and who your family needs you to be. Tomorrow I'll face them all. Tonight, I just needed to remember who I was beneath the uniform, beneath the rank, beneath the weight of expectations and disappointments. Tonight I was just Diana Martinez, coming home to a wedding where nothing was what it seemed. The rehearsal dinner was held at Casa Esperanza, an upscale Mexican restaurant that Victoria had chosen specifically because it was, quote, authentic but not too ethnic, for Marcus's military friends. I arrived exactly on time, wearing a modest navy dress that would blend into the background, or so I thought. Victoria spotted me the moment I walked through the carved wooden doors. She was holding court near the bar, radiant in a white cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her laugh carried across the room, bright and performative, the sound of someone who'd never learned the difference between being heard and being listened to. "Diana," she called out, loud enough for half the restaurant to turn and look. "Everyone, my big sister finally made it." The way she said big sister made it sound like a medical condition. I walked over, accepting the air kiss she offered while noting how she positioned herself so that everyone could see her dress, her ring, her perfect makeup. "You look," she paused, eyes scanning my outfit with the precision of a missile guidance system, "comfortable." "Thank you." I didn't return the compliment. Marcus stood beside her in his dress uniform, looking every inch the professional soldier. Up close, I could see the details that had impressed his superiors. The perfect posture, the sharp attention to detail, the way he listened more than he spoke. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 26, with the kind of earnest intensity that reminded me why I'd joined the military in the first place. "Marcus, this is my sister Diana," Victoria said. her hand possessive on his arm. "The one I told you about." Whatever she'd told him, his expression remained politely neutral as he extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. Victoria's mentioned you work in logistics?" The word hit like a small slap. Logistics. As if my 15 years of service, my combat deployments, my strategic innovations could be reduced to inventory management. "Something like that," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, respectful, professional. "Diana's never been one for details," Victoria laughed, steering Marcus away before he could ask follow-up questions. "Come on, I want you to meet my college roommate." I was left standing by the bar, watching my sister parade her fiancé around the room like a trophy she'd won at considerable effort. The bartender, a young woman with sympathetic eyes, slid a margarita across the polished wood. "On the house," she said quietly. "You look like you need it." The seating arrangement at dinner told me everything I needed to know about my place in Victoria's world. She and Marcus sat at the head table with our mother, his parents, and the wedding party. I was placed at table 7, wedged between Victoria's former boss, the one who'd fired her, and a distant cousin who spent the entire meal trying to sell me life insurance. From my seat, I had a perfect view of the head table and could hear fragments of conversation carried on the desert breeze flowing through the open patio doors. Victoria was telling stories, her voice animated and commanding attention. "Diana was always so serious as a kid," she was saying, fork gesturing for emphasis. "Never quite figured out how to have fun. Mom used to worry she'd end up alone. Didn't you, Mom?" Our mother, Elena, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Victoria, maybe we should." "Oh, it's fine," Victoria continued, warming to her theme. She found her calling eventually. Keeping things organized for important people. "It's honest work." Marcus looked puzzled. "What branch of logistics? Supply chain management? Transportation?" "Oh, you know how Diana is about her work," Victoria said with a dismissive wave. "Very secretive. Probably signs a lot of paperwork and makes sure the coffee machine stays stocked." Several people at the head table chuckled politely. Marcus didn't. He was studying Victoria's face with the kind of careful attention that suggested he was processing information that didn't quite add up. The conversation moved on, but I noticed Marcus glancing in my direction several times throughout the meal. There was something in his expression, not quite recognition, but a nagging familiarity, like trying to remember where you'd seen someone before. During the toasts, Victoria's maid of honor stood up with a glass of champagne and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jessica had known Victoria since college, which meant she'd witnessed firsthand the progression from ambitious sorority president to serial job hopper, with increasingly creative explanations for her career setbacks. "Victoria has always been a fighter," Jessica began, her tone carefully neutral. "She never gives up on getting what she wants, no matter what obstacles stand in her way." The subtext was clear to anyone who knew Victoria's history of leaving those obstacles in ruins behind her. But Marcus heard only the surface meaning, nodding appreciatively at what he interpreted as a tribute to his fiancé's determination. "And we're so grateful she found Marcus," Jessica continued, "because he's clearly the stabilizing influence she's been looking for." Victoria beamed, raising her glass. "To family," she declared, "and to leaving the past where it belongs." Her eyes found mine across the room, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. The smile turned sharp, predatory. She was making sure I understood the rules of engagement for tomorrow's ceremony. After dinner, as the party moved to the bar for drinks, I found myself cornered by Victoria's friend Amanda, a real estate agent, with the aggressive friendliness of someone working on commission. "So Diana, what do you actually do for work?" Amanda asked, leaning in conspiratorially. "Victoria's always so vague about it." "I work for the government." "Oh, how exciting. Like CIA stuff?" "Not exactly. Homeland Security? FBI?" Her eyes were bright with the prospect of cocktail party gossip. "More administrative," I said, borrowing Victoria's own deflection. Amanda's face fell slightly. "Oh, well, that's important too, I guess." Before I could respond, Victoria appeared at my elbow, like a well-dressed shark sensing blood in the water. "Diana, there you are!" I wanted you to meet Marcus's best man, Captain Rodriguez. She practically dragged me toward a cluster of uniformed officers near the windows. Captain Rodriguez was career military, probably early 30s, with the kind of weathered confidence that came from multiple deployments. He shook my hand with genuine warmth. Any family of Victoria's is family of ours, he said. Marcus is lucky to be marrying into such a close-knit group. Victoria's laugh was like crystal breaking. Oh, we're close when it matters. Diana's always been the independent type. Marches to her own drum, don't you, sis? Some might say that, I replied carefully. What line of work are you in, Diana? Captain Rodriguez asked. Before I could answer, Victoria jumped in. Government work. Very hush-hush. She can't really talk about it. Ah, classified stuff, Rodriguez nodded knowingly. I get it. Lot of that going around these days. Something like that. Victoria agreed, her smile razor-sharp. Diana's always been good at keeping secrets. Sometimes I think she forgets we're family. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Rodriguez looked between us, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. I met Victoria's gaze steadily, recognizing the challenge for what it was. Family's complicated, I said finally. Sometimes the people closest to us see what they need to see, rather than what's actually there. Victoria's eyes flashed, but before she could respond, Marcus approached our group. He'd loosened his tie, and there was something different in his posture, less formal, more observant. Captain Rodriguez, sir, he said, then turned to me. Ms. Martinez, I was hoping I could ask you something. Of course. You mentioned you work for the government. Would that be the Department of Defense by any chance? The question was casual, but I caught the sharp intake of breath from Victoria. She moved closer to Marcus, her hand finding his arm. Honey, Diana doesn't really like talking about work at family events, she said quickly. You know how civilians are about military stuff? They get uncomfortable. But Marcus wasn't looking at Victoria. He was looking at me, and in his eyes I saw the moment when pieces began clicking into place. Not recognition yet, but awareness that something significant was being hidden from him. I don't mind talking about work, I said quietly, when the conversation calls for it. Victoria's grip on Marcus's arm tightened. Well, it's getting late, and we have such a big day tomorrow. Diana, you should probably head back to your hotel. Get some rest. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal, delivered with the kind of practiced authority Victoria had been wielding over me our entire lives. The message was clear. Know your place. Stay in your lane. Don't complicate her perfect evening. As I gathered my purse and said my goodbyes, I caught Marcus watching me one more time. This time, his expression was different. Puzzled, almost troubled, like a soldier who'd noticed something out of place on a familiar patrol route. Walking to my car under the desert stars, I realized that tomorrow's ceremony wouldn't just be a wedding. It would be a reckoning that had been building for years between the sister who'd learned to diminish others to elevate herself and the sister who'd learned to stand tall in a world that demanded she prove her worth every single day. Victoria thought she'd positioned all the pieces on her chessboard exactly where she wanted them. She had no idea that one of those pieces was a queen, just waiting for the right moment to move. The Cielo Vista Country Club was transformed into something from a magazine spread. White roses cascaded from every available surface, crystal chandeliers caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and a string quartet played soft melodies that drifted across the perfectly manicured grounds. I stood at the back of the ceremony space watching 300 guests settle into white chairs arranged with military precision. Victoria had spared no expense. This was her moment to prove she'd finally achieved the life she'd always believed she deserved. My seat was in the very last row, partially obscured by a marble pillar. The placement wasn't accidental. When the photographer swept the room during the ceremony, I'd be safely out of frame, just another anonymous guest who wouldn't distract from Victoria's perfect day. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A charcoal gray dress with a modest neckline, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a simple chignon. Nothing that would draw attention or upstage the bride. The last thing I wanted was to give Victoria ammunition for later complaints about my inappropriate appearance. As guests filed in, I recognized faces from our childhood. Neighbors, family friends, distant relatives who remembered me as the quiet Martinez girl who'd disappeared into the military rather than settle down like a proper young woman should. Their glances in my direction were brief, polite, accompanied by the kind of pitying smiles reserved for family disappointments. The wedding party processed down the aisle with choreographed perfection. Victoria's bridesmaids wore dusty rose gowns that complemented their carefully bronzed skin, each carrying bouquets of white peonies tied with silk ribbons. Marcus's groomsmen stood at attention in their dress uniforms, ribbons and medals gleaming in the afternoon light. Then came Marcus himself, and I had to admit Victoria had chosen well. He looked every inch the distinguished officer, confident, honorable, the kind of man who'd earned his rank through merit rather than politics. As he took his position at the altar, his eyes swept the crowd in that automatic threat assessment all soldiers learn to do in unfamiliar environments. When his gaze reached the back row, it paused on me for just a moment. Something flickered across his face. That same nagging recognition I'd seen at the rehearsal dinner, stronger now, but still not quite resolved. The music swelled, and Victoria appeared at the back of the aisle on our uncle's arm. She was radiant, there was no denying it. The dress was perfect, her makeup flawless, her smile bright enough to power the chandeliers. She'd choreographed every detail of this moment, and it was exactly what she'd dreamed of since we were children playing wedding with her dolls. The ceremony itself was brief but elegant. Victoria had insisted on traditional vows, the kind that promised love, honor, and obedience, without getting too specific about the practical realities of marriage. Marcus spoke his vows with genuine emotion, his voice steady and sure. When Victoria recited hers, her performance was pitch perfect, the loving bride promising to support her military husband through whatever challenges lay ahead. If only she knew what those challenges actually entailed. If only she understood the weight of the decisions Marcus made daily, the lives that depended on his judgment, the strategic thinking required to lead soldiers in an increasingly complex world. But Victoria had never been interested in understanding. She was interested in the image, the status, the security that came with being an officer's wife. The actual work of military service was just background noise to her. The reception began with cocktails on the terrace, where guests mingled against the backdrop of the Franklin Mountains. I lingered near the edge of the crowd, nursing a glass of wine and watching the carefully orchestrated social dance. Victoria moved through the crowd like a queen holding court, accepting congratulations and compliments with gracious smiles. I was standing near the bar when Captain Rodriguez approached, a champagne flute in each hand. "Thought you might need a refill," he said, offering me one of the glasses. "Thank you, that's very kind." "Marcus mentioned you work for the government. Defense Department?" His tone was casual, but I could sense the professional curiosity underneath. "In a way. I ask because we had this incredible briefing a few months back. New tactical protocols, really innovative stuff. Best presentation I've seen in 15 years of service." He took a sip of champagne, led by this female general, brilliant woman. Made me rethink everything I thought I knew about combat strategy. My pulse quickened. Sounds impressive. She was General Martinez, I think her name was. Anyway, Marcus hasn't stopped talking about it since. Says it completely changed his approach to leadership. The irony was suffocating. Here was Captain Rodriguez, praising my work to my face while standing 10 feet away from my sister, who'd spent years telling everyone I was a failure. "Diana." Victoria's voice cut through the ambient conversation like a blade. She was approaching with a small group of her college friends, her smile bright and dangerous. "There you are, hiding by the bar again." The friends, Amanda, Jessica, and 2 others I didn't recognize, formed a loose semicircle around us. I recognized the formation from childhood, Victoria positioning her audience for maximum impact. "Ladies, this is my sister Diana," Victoria announced. "The one I was telling you about." "Oh, the government worker," said one of the friends, a blonde woman with the kind of aggressive tan that spoke of too much leisure time. "How exciting." "Not really," Victoria laughed. Diana's more of a support person. You know how bureaucracy works. Lots of people doing small jobs to keep the machinery running. Captain Rodriguez looked confused. Support person? I thought you said. Diana's always been modest about her work, Victoria interrupted smoothly. Haven't you, sis? Never one to oversell her importance. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Never one to oversell her importance. The implication was clear. Any claims I might make about my career would be obvious exaggeration, desperate attempts to seem more significant than I actually was. Some jobs speak for themselves, I said quietly. Oh, absolutely, Victoria agreed, her tone dripping with false sincerity. And some people are just naturally supportive, background players. Not everyone can be a star, right? The friends tittered appreciatively. This was why they were here. Not just to celebrate Victoria's wedding, but to witness her subtle dominance over the sister who'd always made her insecure. I mean, let's be honest, Victoria continued, warming to her theme. Diana's 34 and still playing dress-up in someone else's uniform. Most people our age have actual careers, real responsibilities. But Diana, well, she found her level. The silence that followed was heavy with second-hand embarrassment. Even Victoria's friends looked uncomfortable with how far she'd pushed it. Captain Rodriguez stared at her like she'd just started speaking in tongues. But Victoria wasn't finished. She never knew when to stop, never understood that victories could turn into defeats if you pressed too hard. I keep hoping she'll grow up eventually, Victoria said, her voice carrying across the terrace. Find a real job, maybe settle down like a normal person. But some people are just stuck, you know? Forever trying to prove something that isn't there. That's when Marcus appeared at the edge of our group. He'd been making rounds, thanking guests, playing the perfect groom. But something in his posture had changed. His expression was no longer politely social. It was sharp, focused, like a soldier who'd just identified a threat. What's not there? He asked quietly. Victoria turned toward him, her smile faltering slightly at his tone. Oh, honey, we were just talking about Diana's little job. You know how she is about her work. Actually, I don't, Marcus said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Why don't you tell me exactly what Diana does for the government? The moment stretched taut as a wire. Victoria's friends sensed the shift in atmosphere and began to drift away, suddenly finding conversations elsewhere more interesting. Captain Rodriguez remained, though, watching with the intensity of someone witnessing a puzzle finally coming together. She's in logistics, Victoria said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. Filing, organization, that sort of thing. Marcus nodded slowly, then turned to me. Ms. Martinez, would you say that's an accurate description of your work? The question hung in the desert air like a challenge. I could feel the weight of years pressing down on me. Years of being diminished, dismissed, erased from my own family's story. Years of watching Victoria build her identity by tearing down mine. I looked at my sister, beautiful in her white dress, surrounded by the perfect life she'd constructed on a foundation of lies and willful ignorance. Then I looked at Marcus, the young officer whose career I'd helped shape, whose life I'd probably saved through strategies he'd never known came from me. No, I said finally, my voice carrying clearly across the terrace. I wouldn't say that's accurate at all. Victoria's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Marcus stepped closer, and I could see the exact moment when recognition finally clicked into place. General Martinez, he said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. You're General Diana Martinez. The words fell into the crowd like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock outward in concentric circles. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. The string quartet played on, oblivious to the fact that Victoria's perfect wedding had just become something else entirely. Victoria swayed on her feet, her bouquet slipping from nerveless fingers to land on the terrace stones with a soft thud. And I stood there, finally visible after years in the shadows, watching my sister's carefully constructed world begin to crumble around her designer shoes. The silence stretched for exactly 17 seconds. I counted them, the way I'd been trained to measure time during crisis situations. when every heartbeat could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Then the terrace erupted. Marcus stepped forward and executed a sharp, precise salute, the kind reserved for superior officers, not wedding guests. His voice carried across the suddenly quiet space. "General Martinez, ma'am, it's an honor." Captain Rodriguez immediately followed suit, his face flushing red as he realized he'd been casually discussing classified briefings with the general who delivered them. "Ma'am, I apologize for not recognizing you earlier." A ripple effect swept through the crowd as other military personnel began to understand what was happening. A lieutenant colonel near the bar straightened to attention. Two Air Force officers set down their drinks and saluted. Words spread in whispers that grew louder with each repetition. "That's General Martinez. The Diana Martinez, 2-star general. She developed the Helmand protocols." Victoria remained frozen in place, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. The color had drained completely from her face, leaving only the stark contrast of her makeup against paper-white skin. "This can't be right," she whispered, but her voice carried in the desert stillness. "Diana's just... She's not what?" Marcus asked, and there was something dangerous in his tone now. The polite, accommodating groom had disappeared, replaced by an officer who just discovered his commanding general had been systematically humiliated at his own wedding. Our mother, Elena, appeared at Victoria's elbow, her own face stricken with dawning comprehension. "Mija," she said softly to me, "why didn't you tell us?" "I tried to tell you," I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos around us. "3 years ago, when I made Brigadier General, you hung up on me because Victoria said it would be inappropriate to discuss my hobby during her engagement party." The words hit Elena like physical blows. I watched her remember that phone call, remember choosing Victoria's comfort over her other daughter's achievement. Her hand flew to her mouth. "And when I made Major General last year," I continued, "I sent the newspaper clipping. Victoria told you I was showing off, and asked you not to encourage my delusions of grandeur." Victoria finally found her voice. "I never said that. You're lying." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone, scrolled through old text messages, and began reading aloud. From Victoria Martinez, October 15th, 2023. "Diana's lost in Fantasyland again. Don't feed into her stories about being important. She needs to face reality, not live in some military pretend world." The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the unfolding drama. Jessica, the maid of honor, was recording everything on her phone. Amanda, the real estate agent, looked like she'd stumbled onto the story of the year. Marcus turned to Victoria, his expression unreadable. You knew exactly who your sister was, and you deliberately hid it from me." "I was protecting our relationship," Victoria said desperately. "She would have overshadowed everything, made it all about her, like she always does." "Made it about her?" Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his voice incredulous. "Ma'am, with respect, General Martinez saved my entire squad in Afghanistan. The protocols she developed, they're the reason 12 of my soldiers came home alive." "That's impossible," Victoria snapped. "Diana pushes papers. She files reports. She's not some war hero." "Actually," said a new voice from the crowd, "she kind of is." A woman in an Air Force dress uniform approached our group. "Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, my deputy commander and closest friend." I hadn't expected her to come, but there she was, metal ribbons gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Sarah," I said, "what are you doing here?" "Someone had to represent your actual life," she replied with a slight smile. "When you told me you were coming to a family wedding where nobody knew who you really were, I figured you might need backup." She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to briefing senior leadership. "For those who don't know, General Diana Martinez has served with distinction for 15 years. She's commanded brigades in 3 combat zones, developed counterinsurgency protocols that have been adopted by NATO forces worldwide, and personally led rescue operations that saved over 200 lives." Victoria was shaking her head frantically. No, this is wrong. Diana's not... She can't be." "She also," Sarah continued remorselessly, "received the Purple Heart after being wounded while evacuating civilians from a bombed hospital in Syria. The Bronze Star with V device for valor under fire. and the Distinguished Service Medal for developing the tactical innovations that Lieutenant Thompson's unit has been implementing for the past 6 months. Marcus went very still. The innovations that saved my squad last month? Among others, yes. The silence that followed was different from before. Not shocked, but heavy with the weight of understanding. Marcus looked at Victoria, then at me, then back at Victoria. "You knew," he said again, and this time it wasn't a question. "You knew that your sister was my commanding general, and you said nothing." "I didn't think it mattered," Victoria said weakly. "Didn't think it mattered?" Marcus's voice rose, drawing more attention from across the terrace. "Diana Martinez is the reason I'm alive. Her strategies, her protocols, they've shaped everything I do as an officer. And you told me she was a failure?" The crowd was growing larger as more guests realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Someone's grandmother was fanning herself with a wedding program while demanding that her grandson explain what was happening. A group of Victoria's sorority sisters huddled together, phones out, already crafting social media posts about the most dramatic wedding meltdown in El Paso history. Victoria seemed to realize she was losing control of the narrative. She straightened her spine, smoothed her dress, and tried to reclaim her authority. "This is my wedding day," she announced, her voice shaking but determined. "I won't have it ruined by Diana's need for attention. Everyone just needs to calm down and remember why we're here." "We're here," said our cousin Miguel, stepping forward from the crowd, "because you invited us to celebrate love and family. But what I'm seeing is a woman who's been lying to her husband and humiliating her sister for years." Miguel had been quiet during our childhood, the peacemaker who tried to smooth over family conflicts. But he was also a career Navy, and his expression suggested he understood exactly what had been happening here. "Diana," he continued, "I owe you an apology. We all do. We should have questioned why you stopped coming to family events. Should have wondered why you never talked about your work. Should have realized that someone doesn't just disappear from their family unless they're being pushed out." More voices joined in, family members and family friends beginning to piece together years of Victoria's carefully crafted narrative. The cousin who remembered Victoria laughing about Diana's military phase. The neighbor who'd been told Diana was, quote, going through a difficult time and couldn't handle family stress. The family friend who'd been warned not to ask Diana about her work because it was a sensitive subject. Victoria looked around desperately, searching for allies, for someone who might help her salvage the situation. But even her closest friends were backing away, suddenly understanding that they'd been complicit in something ugly. "Marcus," she pleaded, reaching for his arm. "Please, don't let her ruin this. She's always been jealous of me, always tried to make everything about her." Marcus stepped back, avoiding her touch. "Diana didn't make this about her, Victoria. You did. When you spent our entire relationship lying about who she was. When you made me complicit in disrespecting an officer who's done more for this country than I'll probably accomplish in my entire career." He turned to me, his young face serious and pained. "General, I need to apologize. Not just for tonight, but for every conversation where I didn't question what I was being told. For being part of something that dishonored your service. Lieutenant Thompson," I said formally, "you had no way of knowing the truth. The fault isn't yours." "But it is mine," Elena said quietly. She'd been standing frozen during the entire confrontation, but now she stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Misha, I'm so sorry. I chose to believe what was easy instead of asking the hard questions. I failed you as a mother." Victoria whirled on her. "Mom, don't apologize to her. This is all manipulation. She planned this, showing up here to embarrass me on my wedding day." "I showed up," I said, my voice cutting through her protests, "because you invited me. Remember? You sent me an invitation. You wanted me here to witness your perfect day. You just didn't expect that perfect day to include the truth." The terrace had fallen silent again, 300 guests watching the final moments of a marriage that had ended before it truly began. In the distance, the string quartet continued playing, their music a surreal soundtrack to the collapse of everything Victoria had built. Marcus removed his wedding ring and held it out to Victoria. "I can't do this. I can't build a marriage on lies and disrespect. especially not when that disrespect was directed at someone I admire more than almost anyone in the service. Victoria stared at the ring like it might bite her. "You're choosing her over me?" "I'm choosing truth over lies," Marcus replied. "I'm choosing integrity over performance, things you obviously don't value." As he walked away, still in his dress uniform, still carrying himself with the bearing of the officer Diana had helped shape, Victoria finally collapsed. Not gracefully, not dramatically, but with the sudden, complete surrender of someone whose carefully constructed world had just imploded around her. The wedding was over. But for Diana Martinez, something new was about to begin. 3 months later, I stood at the podium of the El Paso Convention Center, looking out at an audience of 800 military personnel, veterans, and family members. The banner behind me read, "Breaking the Silence, Military Families and Hidden Wounds Conference." The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 months ago, I'd been the hidden wound in my own family's narrative. Now I was helping others find their voices. "How many of you," I began, "have served your country with honor, only to come home to families who diminish your service? Who reduce your sacrifices to hobbies, your achievements to exaggerations, your dedication to obsession?" Hands rose throughout the audience. So many hands. How many of you have been told that your military career isn't a real job? That you need to grow up and find something more substantial? That your service is somehow less valuable than civilian pursuits? More hands. I could see tears on some faces, recognition on others. Today we change that narrative. Today, we stop accepting the unacceptable. In the front row sat Marcus Thompson, now Captain Thompson, after his promotion last month. He'd requested a transfer to a different base, partly for his career, but mostly to distance himself from the wreckage of his almost marriage. We'd had coffee twice since the wedding, conversations that were professional, but carried the weight of shared understanding. Beside him sat my mother, Elena, who'd spent the past 3 months in therapy trying to understand how she'd lost one daughter while trying to protect the other. The healing between us was slow, careful, like soldiers crossing a minefield, but it was happening. Sarah Chen was there too, in the second row, along with Captain Rodriguez and a dozen other officers who'd become inadvertent witnesses to my family's dysfunction. They'd insisted on attending, saying it was important for senior leadership to model the behavior they expected from their subordinates. Victoria was not in the audience. Victoria was in Phoenix, working as a receptionist at a dental office, and telling anyone who'd listen that her sister had, quote, ruined her life out of jealousy. Some stories, apparently, were easier to believe than the truth. After my presentation, during the break, a young sergeant approached me. Her name tag read Williams, and she looked barely old enough to enlist. "General, ma'am," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I wanted to thank you. My parents, they've been telling people I'm wasting my life in the Army, that I should quit and get married, have kids, be normal. After hearing your story, I finally understood it's not my job to make them comfortable with my choices." "What did you do?" I asked. "I invited them to my promotion ceremony next month. Told them they could come and see who I really am, or they could stay home and keep pretending I'm someone I'm not. But I'm done hiding my accomplishments to protect their feelings." Behind her, other service members were nodding, sharing their own stories of family dismissal and hidden achievements. A Navy pilot, whose mother introduced her as "my daughter who flies planes sometimes." A Marine colonel whose father still asked when he was going to get a real career. An Air Force medic whose family thought she was playing nurse, instead of saving lives in combat zones. The conference had grown from a single presentation to a 3-day event. We were developing resources for military families, educational materials about military service, communication strategies for bridging civilian-military divides, and support networks for service members dealing with family rejection. But more than that, we were creating something I'd never had growing up. Permission to be proud of who we were. During lunch, I found myself in conversation with Dr. Patricia Vega, a family therapist who specialized in military-civilian relationships. She'd been following the story since video of the wedding confrontation had gone viral. Someone had posted Jessica's recording, and it had been viewed over 2 million times. "What you experienced with your sister," Dr. Vega said, It's more common than people realize. When someone in a family achieves at a level that threatens the other's self-image, the family often chooses to diminish the achiever rather than celebrate them. Is that what happened? Think about it. Victoria built her identity around being the successful sister, the one who understood how to navigate social situations, who knew what really mattered in life. Your military success didn't just challenge that narrative, it destroyed it. Easier to convince everyone you were delusional than to admit she'd been wrong about you for years. I thought about Victoria, last seen in the hotel lobby 3 months ago, packing her honeymoon luggage alone while refusing to speak to anyone who might ask questions about what had happened. She'd created an elaborate story about Marcus being quote, unstable and unable to handle success. But the truth was too well documented now. Too many witnesses had seen exactly what had transpired. The sad part, Dr. Vega continued, is that families like yours often don't recover. The revelation of truth is too threatening to their established dynamics. They'd rather lose the successful member than restructure their understanding of themselves. But some families did recover. That afternoon, I sat with Elena in her car outside the convention center, watching El Paso spread out toward the mountains. "I keep thinking about your father," she said quietly. "How proud he would have been. How angry he would have been at us for not seeing what was right in front of us." "Dad saw it," I replied. "He always told me I was going to do something important with my life. Remember? He used to say I had strategic thinking when I was just playing chess. He did, and I should have listened to him instead of—" She paused, struggling with words. "Instead of choosing the easy path." Victoria was always so demanding, so dramatic. It was simpler to give her what she wanted than to deal with the tantrums. You were trying to keep peace in the family. I was enabling her to destroy you. Elena's voice broke slightly. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for that." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching traffic flow past on I-10. Finally, Elena reached over and took my hand. "Tell me about Syria," she said. "Tell me about the hospital evacuation. I want to know everything I should have asked about years ago." So I told her. About the bombed pediatric ward, the children trapped under rubble, the decision to lead the rescue mission personally instead of sending junior officers into danger. About the shrapnel that had nearly cost me my left eye, the Purple Heart ceremony where no family had been present because no family had been told. Elena cried while I talked, grieving not just for the daughter she'd failed to support, but for all the moments of pride and connection they'd missed, because she'd chosen Victoria's version of reality over the truth. "I have something for you," she said when I finished. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. "This was your father's, his Air Force ring. I was going to give it to you at his funeral, but Victoria said it would be, quote, inappropriate, since you might make a scene." I opened the box. Dad's class ring from the Air Force Academy, the one he'd worn every day until arthritis made it impossible. The gold was worn smooth in places, marked by decades of service and sacrifice. "He wanted you to have it," Elena continued. "He said you were the one who truly understood what service meant." I slipped the ring onto my right hand. It was too large, but I could have it resized. For now, it was enough to feel that connection to the man who'd seen my potential when everyone else saw only problems. That evening, back in my hotel room, I video called Sarah to debrief the day's events. She was at her desk on base, surrounded by the familiar chaos of military administration. "How did it feel?" she asked. "Being visible like that? Having your story out there?" "Terrifying," I admitted, "but also liberating. For years, I've been hiding who I am to make other people comfortable. Today I got to be General Martinez without apology. And I remembered why I earned these stars in the first place. Not for my family's approval, but because I was good at this. Because I could lead, and strategize, and save lives." Sarah smiled. "Welcome back to yourself, Diana." The next morning, I stood on my hotel balcony, watching the sun rise over the desert landscape of my childhood. My phone was full of messages, from service members who'd attended the conference, from reporters wanting interviews, from organizations asking me to speak at their events. But the message that mattered most was from Marcus Thompson. General, thank you for showing me what integrity looks like under pressure. I hope someday I can lead with half your courage. I thought about courage as I packed my bags for the flight back to San Antonio. For years, I'd thought courage meant enduring silently, absorbing the blows, accepting the diminishment. I'd thought that fighting back would make me like them. Petty, vindictive, small. But real courage, I understood now, was refusing to shrink. It was standing up and saying, this is who I am, and I won't apologize for it anymore. It was choosing truth over peace. Authenticity over acceptance. My phone buzzed one last time, a text from an unknown number. Saw your speech online. I'm a Marine corporal. My family thinks I'm wasting my time too. Thank you for showing me I'm not alone. I smiled, finished packing, and headed for the airport. There were more stories to tell, more voices to amplify, more family dynamics to challenge. Victoria had called me a failure at her wedding. She'd been wrong about everything else, but especially about that. Failure would have been staying silent, accepting the lies, allowing her version of me to become the truth. Instead, I'd chosen to succeed on my own terms. And that success tasted like freedom, looked like integrity, and felt like coming home to myself after years of exile. The desert sun climbed higher as my plane lifted off from El Paso, carrying me toward whatever came next. But for the first time in years, I wasn't flying away from my family. I was flying toward my real life, the one I'd earned with blood, sweat, and 2 silver stars that no one could take away from me ever again. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.